and subscribe, and my stories will thrive. Welcome to another video by the Blue Tongues of Hell for some more Hildar Chronicles. This 18th chapter is called King's Ransom. The undead had spread over Vigrid Plains like a contagious disease. They regrouped lethargically near a fuming chasm that had created a fork in Elivargar River, and they gazed east religiously. The way they reacted when their eyes flickered red to the rising sun. Any Gothi priest would have welcomed them open arms into their sun-worshipping ranks. Spears of light pronged the undead and tugged them west in a choir of almost enthusiastic lamentation. They were rewarded with a firework display that flowered over the black Nibelungen teeth and hastened their irregular pace. The Nibelungen expedition, or what was left of it, crossed Hell's Gorges on foot and finally made it to Helheim. Hedil led the way with Harald at his side. The latter had relayed the wild story of how Hedil's father had been slain at the foot of the Nibelungen Mountains, along with all his men and horses, and it was a tough pill to swallow. How the young man had made it out of such a deadly ambush, while Bor and Thorsten had not, was a mystery. Asmund voted for coward's luck over divine providence, and Harald kept himself from overtly taking offence, which Hedil found rather suspicious. The king of Muspelheim was hardly bashful. When Harald went to chat with Astrid, Kyoku casually approached Hedil and thanked him for saving her husband's life. Asmund watched them exchange pleasantries, as if they were on a stroll by the beach again. Kyoku touched her moist forehead and didn't think twice about appearances when Hedil tapped her skin with the yukata handkerchief he kept in his pocket. Kyoku laughed and felt a round belly, while Asmund looked away angrily. Doing so, he caught Astrid, avoiding eye contact with him, turning awkwardly to Harald. The two improvised an ongoing conversation about Mooncastle that was poking its head over the tentacular oak trees. Harald's acting was far better than Astrid's and showed years of experience.
What in hell could they be up to?
A series of bird calls signaled the group had been spotted by Helheim sentinels, which was a positive note, meaning the realm hadn't crumbled in their absence. Hedil had almost hoped for some minor catastrophe due to lack of discipline, so that the burden of returning empty-handed and without the king would be less painful. They would have to ride back to the mountains in the near future to bring Njal's body home. And Hedil was not looking forward to that adventure either. What was he going to say to Estrid? Before Moon Castle's white walls, Hedil called for the guards to open the massive gate. The rising sun had painted the top half pink, and lurking shadows were being rapidly absorbed. The wind was whispering a distant commotion from the east, and didn't sound like a concealed welcome party. Kyoko clutched Asmund's hand in fear of what was approaching through the mist. He coldly pushed her away. In the morning haze, after such a harrowing trip, nobody had paid attention to a green flag beating over the castle in the southern sea breeze. Nobody apart from Harald, who concealed a grin. Pink antlers poked out from the parapet above the main gate and introduced a scarred man covered in blackened chainmail. Even his face was daubed in black paste. The man opened his arms wide and cried,
Welcome to Red Moon Castle.
Asmund couldn't believe it.
Gunnar? That's King Gunnar to you, deserter. Open the gates immediately, and no harm will be done to you or your realm.
Shouted Hedil.
Is that so? Where is your king, boy, so the adults can talk?
Hedil looked around sorrowfully.
He's dead. Well, that will make things much easier. Drop your weapons and kneel to your new king, and perhaps I will not harm this charming lady,
said Gunnar, tugging a chain to get Estrid to stand. She was marred, but not enough to be unrecognizable.
You, Mr. Husband, eagerly waiting for your return. Over there. He put so much into that glum expression, and you didn't even notice him.
Among many others, Bjorn's head was on display over the western wall.
Plenty more pikes and heads to spare, if you don't do as I say. Not that I really care what happens to you down there, or to them back here,
he said, giving out a concealed order by snapping his fingers. From within Helheim's walls there came a pounding on drums. Loud blasts of buglehorns resonated over the orange fields and woke every animal still asleep. Most living creatures scattered away, while the herds of the undead beyond the mist were drawn to the alarming racket like flies to a fresh carcass.
What are you doing, Harald?
Cried Hedil. The Muspelheim king had fallen to his knees, and so had his cousin Astrid.
We've lost, son of Njal. Can't you hear what's coming?
said Harald with unfitting calm. The quicker we get inside, the more chances we have of turning this to our advantage, said Astrid, with a hint of shame.
What's wrong with you? That's your mother up there.
Edil looked at her askance, while trying to find something in the black leather bag he was still carrying.
It won't help her if her daughter dies in front of her, will it?
Replied Harald, letting a bit of contempt slip from his lips. When the rumble from the east was almost tangible, Harald lost his nerve.
Oh, get down and bloody beg, Drog.
Edil checked with Asmund if he had heard correctly, but the grim Prince of Vanaheim was intent on observing the western walls that someone was stealthily climbing with ease. The shadow was already over the wall when several more repeated the feat. Edil pretended he hadn't seen anything and concentrated on the empty bag that wouldn't give him what he needed.
The mind controls it, does it? It would help to know what it actually contained, other than an ice pick and a scorcher.
As he said the words in his mind, a wooden hilt materialized and filled his palm. He pulled it out and sighed.
Hold this, would you?
He said to Kyoko, who was looking over her shoulder towards the mist. She took the wooden stick in her trembling right hand and felt a thorn prick in her skin. She squealed and dropped it. Blood trickled from her palm where something had stung her. She carefully picked up the wooden object again and observed its gnarled, smooth surface. And there were no thorns or barbs that could have scratched her. Kyoko tentatively slid her fingers around the hilt and slowly gripped it, expecting with squinted eyes another prick of pain. This time, she did sense a slight discomfort in her palm, but the rush of unexpected tingling down her arm, up her spine, and throughout her body was a fair compensation.
So, boy, what will it be?
Cried Gunnar, pulling on Estrid's chain to choke her. Edil whispered to Astrid,
If you've given up, at least give us the gripper and the bear's blade.
Asmund wasn't as polite and struck Astrid's nape with the soft underside of his fist. She slammed face forwards into the wet grass, and Asmund pinched the gripper and the sword.
Don't, Asmund,
protested Harald.
You'll get us all killed.
That was precisely when the undead began to stumble out of the mist. An aurochs with half of its skull visible charged forwards with a trail of deformed creatures that used to be human. Kyoko felt helpless as the river of broken skeletons and mangled flesh thundered towards them. She gripped the wooden hilt until her knuckles were white as bone and sang a lullaby to her unborn child. Her hand was hot, but she didn't feel a thing before the imminent danger. Asmund squeezed his remaining hand into the gauntlet and grabbed the black blade and knocked Harald out of the way. He dragged the heavy weapon as he ran to save his wife about to be mauled and ploughed the field behind him. Kyoko screamed and lightning struck the giant ash tree far away. Asmund threw himself between her and the stampeding aurochs and shielded Kyoko with his huge blade. Kyoko's palm throbbed when the beast came crashing upon them and she curled up into a ball. There was a sound of violent bone splitting and a golden clatter of iron. And then 2 great soggy lumps of flesh flopped to either side of Asmund. The halved carcass slid past Kyoko, and the 2 parts wriggled away in circles. Kyoko remembered her delirious dreams on Asmund's Drakkar, when he had saved her from the deadly seas. The great Norseman had wielded a sword of sunlight over his head, not to kill her, but apparently to save her life again. She wept as he minced through the undead, still rushing at them. Hedil suddenly thought of the spear that Iktu had pulled out of the bag, and sure enough, when he pictured the weapon in his mind, he was able to draw one out in the nick of time. The spear grew so fast that it cut his chin. It had a star-headed blade that ran down the sides of a lightweight staff made of Odin knows which metal. He threw it to Harald and withdrew his own claw blades out of his Drakkar fingers. Hedil knew the 3 of them wouldn't be enough to hold off this army of famished corpses. But he would do whatever he could to keep Kyoko safe. If not just for a starling's flight over the castle. While Asmund swung his blade of gold, Hedil carried Kyoko away, swiping his claws at the undead, who hindered his retreat. The ultimatum had failed, and Gunnar had left the parapet. The beating of drums and hooting of horns ceased, and Gunnar's enemies would soon be just a memory. In a rusty rattle of chains and scraping, sliding metal, Helheim's portcullis was being raised for some reason. Harald was first to see the escape route and left his companions behind. Hedil watched him flee without Astrid and cursed. Despite Asmund's efforts to single-handedly annihilate the undead army with his eviscerating blade of mass destruction, he was overwhelmed. He heard Hedil call and saw Kyoko in his arms and ran to snatch her away from him. Hedil didn't argue and carried Astrid instead under his arm. They all sped to the gate with hundreds more of the gruesome undead chasing them. The undead kept flooding the fields and were about to drown their fleeing victims when a pack of drogs poured out of Moon Castle to fend off the dead. Hedil felt a strange warmth inside when he saw Refr wink as he flew past. dogs were ready to risk their lives for him. For humans. When all 5 were inside the castle walls, the dogs darted back through the main entrance, and the Porticaris came crashing down behind them. The undead would be dealt with later, unless they also managed to climb the walls. Standing where he had coerced Helheim's population to yield with Bjorn's head on a pike and Estrid on a leash, Gunnar was now on his knees with Drogar claws around his neck. The body of Estrid was there beside him. Struggle and bloodshed persisted through the streets, and many Vanaheimers and Helheimers were still at each other's throats. Inside the castle, on the 2nd floor, where guests would usually stay, Pekar and Nabori were at a window, peering out into the gloom of early dawn. In small royal rooms, similar to theirs, not far from the king's own chambers, many other children were huddled together. Only 3 were left in the twins' room, and they tried to enjoy the recent space after so many other children had gone missing. Today, Kyoko's twins had been violently woken up by drums and horns and didn't know what kind of torment Gunnar would have in store for them this time. One of Gunnar's berserkers banged their door open and snatched a girl by the hair, who was busy mending holy socks. She wailed as he pulled her away, and he silenced her with a slap on the way out. Nabori hid behind his timorous brother, like he had done the previous days when others had been taken, and they waited for the door to swing open again. Children were taken in 2s, which would mean that one of them would be left all alone. There were screams in the corridor, objects being knocked over and broken, chaotic running. Nabori tried to see what was happening in the courtyard, when another, less qualified berserker bashed the door open. The slob went for the weaker child, like any predator would, elbowed Pekar in the face, and pulled at Nabori's tunic while the boy was trying to get away through an arrow-slit window. Pekar wiped the blood out of his eyes and picked up the closest weapon he could find. A candelabra with only one burnt-out candle. He jumped onto the man's back and slammed the candelabra onto his greasy bald head, digging 3 short prongs onto it. The guards let go of Nabori, and he hurled Pekar off his back into tables and chairs. The oaf howled in pain and tore out the candelabra, sending fountains of blood spraying everywhere. He drew his sword and tried to find the boy who had dared defy him. Standing over Nabori, shaking on the floor, the fat berserker pulled him up into the air with one hand, ready to give the small child a taste of his blood-stained blade. With a broken chair leg, Pekar ran to his brother's rescue and stabbed the man in the back. He dropped Nabori and his sword on top of the child and growled at Pekar with eyes from hell. Outside, a loud bugle horn resounded, and Naburi used the distraction to plunge the berserker's own sword into the back of his leg. Pekar smiled and jumped onto the man again, trying to scratch his eyes out. The man caught one of the boy's fingers in his mouth and bit the top of Pekar's index. On his knees, the man, bespattered in blood, spat out the phalange and gripped the blade with his bare hands to pull it out. His hands bled, but that didn't stop him from thrusting the sword right through one of the boy's rib cages. A panting pregnant woman appeared in the doorway. Kyoko was still holding the wooden hilt that was now burning red. She saw her murdered child and screamed all her rage at the swine, shivering like he'd seen a ghost. The man saw a flicker of violet light in Kyoko's right hand burst out like a rod of fire, and he was suddenly haunted by the moans of tortured souls clawing at him for revenge. He knew this day would come. Working for Gunnar wasn't always unpleasant, but the king's twisted tastes even made his skin crawl. The haunted blade drew closer, and he felt his skin melting with fear. The witch wouldn't go away, and he couldn't stop her screaming violet blade from sinking into his chest, disintegrating his ribs, lungs, and heart. When Kyoko had finished hacking his body like chopping wood, the room was nothing but burnt flesh and sizzling blood. Kyoko felt a terrible pain in her womb, and something gave way. In the courtyard, a loud horn belted out to end all fighting. Refr walked up to King Gunnar and knocked off his ridiculous helmet.
Your king orders you to surrender, or we will execute the lot of you.
Refr dug a claw into Gunnar's jugular without shedding blood and waited for some compliance. When Gunnar grumbled reluctantly, Refr poked the tip of his claw under the man's skin, below his Adam's apple, almost down his throat.
Do what he says. Put down your weapons,
spluttered Gunnar, head lower than the tail of a submissive dog. The Vanaheimers who had heard their king's defeat complied, while others were torn to slivers of meat by delighted drogs and Helheimers seeking revenge. When the invaders had all been rounded up, Hedil in human form borrowed a random sword from someone in the crowd and sentenced the despicable man to death there and then.
Wait,
cried Gunnar.
You need to hear what I have to say.
Harald held his spear tight and flexed his muscles.
I don't know if I can take any more hisses from the dungeon snake,
said Asmund, who'd let Kyoko go find their children in the castle.
Make it quick, vermin,
replied Hedil.
I know more than you could ever know about the woods, the misty curse, and the undead. I know why they haven't died, why we survived 1,000 deaths. I can tell you how to defeat Nebelwood's Mist and put an end to this madness. Is that it?
Said Hedil, drying a teary eye.
Why do you think I dress in black? Why I smear my face with this secret recipe? It repels the mist. We can all go to Valhalla now. All those who perished today are there already. If they were pasted in black. Prince Hedil, we need to find out what he knows,
said Harald.
This could be a turning point in the war against the undead. Feed him to the drogs afterwards if you like. I have more satisfying ends for you, Gunnar,
said Hedil, crouched beside his aunt, stroking her scarred cheeks.
Take him away and find out everything he knows. If I may,
said Refr, asking permission to deal with the petty man. Hedil didn't disagree.
This mysterious paste has a familiar smell of charcoal and lard, with a touch of salmon oil. Am I wrong?
Gunnar blushed under his smeared black face. While Gunnar was being dragged on his back to Mooncastle's own dungeons, Kyoko came back with only one of her sons, holding the boy's hand. In her other arm, she cradled something dead that glistened in the rising sun. People stepped out of her way and stared at Kyoko covered in blood, with an umbilical cord still wrapped around the baby's neck. No tears ran down her ireful face, and Asmund couldn't bring himself to accept what must have happened. Without warning, he knocked Refr out of the way and hoisted the golden blade with one hand over his head. Everyone there was amazed by the glorious weapon and watched him bring it crashing down on Gunnar's head that burst like a swollen beach-dwell carcass into coils of bloody sludge. When the blade of gold hit the cobbles, it sank through the stone like butter and left no trace of who Gunnar used to be, the abhorred king. It all happened too fast. There was nothing Hedil could have done to stop the grieving father. With no doubt, Asmund had deprived Hedil of getting his revenge and had bereft the island of a possible cure against the undead. But the realm was safe for now. They could worry about the biters when their wounds had healed. Kyoko and Asmund's probably never would. See you next time for chapter 19 of the Hildar